Is there such a thing as too much luck? Is there such a thing as too much fun? Messing around, wondering how it's taken so long. I'm really so strong. It's not too much at all.
Welcome to Too Much with Denise Love Hewitt. Another week, another day. Tokyo is here eating his sweet potato, so if you see or hear some noise, that is why. I'm here with Andrew Glazier, who is the CEO and president of Defy Ventures, a national nonprofit focused on entrepreneurship, employment, and personal development in formerly incarcerated men, women, and young adults. Defy Ventures operates programs across 9 states and has enrolled more than 7,000 entrepreneurs in training in prison and community-based programs, engaged more than 7,000 volunteers, and supported the launch of more than 200 businesses. Defy's graduates have a 1-year recidivism rate of less than 10% compared to the national 1-year rate of 30%. Prior to joining Defy Ventures, Andrew served as a senior managing director for City Year Los Angeles, a national AmeriCorps-affiliated nonprofit that is focused on improving public education and addressing the dropout crisis through national service. As senior managing director for City Year Los Angeles, he provided cross-departmental leadership around organizational growth and strategy in support of a long-term impact and growth plan. During his tenure overseeing the program, the City Year program more than doubled number of AmeriCorps members serving in Los Angeles. Prior to joining City Year, he worked in diverse public and private sectors, including real estate, finance and construction, political strategy, education, and government. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So some of you might know this about me, but I have been volunteering with Defy for, we just said 8 years, which feels crazy. And Defy has become a very transformative part. I think of Defy as sort of there's pre-Defy and post-Defy. My understanding of the world fundamentally shifted. And I'll just give a little bit of a story. So when I first signed up to volunteer, I was in an accelerator with my startup. So I was flying back and forth to San Francisco. And I knew that intellectually, I did not fully agree with the prison system, but I had never been. And so I decided to put my time where my mouth was. And so I signed up in a flurry in this commute working on the new product I was building. And I thought, for whatever reason, I thought I was going to women's prison. And then the couple of days before I'm supposed to be in prison, I get the email. They send you this email and they're like, you're going to maximum security men's prison. And I was like, what? And I had no friends that volunteered with me. I was doing this all by myself, which was just, I don't know, classic me. I didn't think about it. And then they had this video they show you where they walk through some of the, I guess, fallacies or initial feelings you might be feeling before you go to prison. And one of the things they say in this video is when you give these people your word, it means something. And so if you bail, it's a violation of sort of the code you signed up when you signed up. And so as someone who prides himself on being a person of their word, you hit me right in the bullseye and I said, well, you can't back out now. You got to go. And so I was very nervous. I was very scared, nervous. I did not know what to expect. And I showed up, and the way that Defy opens when you walk into the room with all the guys is they do this sort of like, I guess, tunnel of love. How would you describe it?
Yeah. It's a welcome tunnel.
Yeah, welcome tunnel. So you're high-fiving everyone. And the moment I walked in, I was like, wow, I think I feel safer in this room than I do in a room with venture capitalists. And that's honestly how it continues to feel, is that I feel many times more alive and engaged and safe in that room than I do in a lot of other spaces I operate in business. And my point of saying that is that it defied, pun intended, all of my expectations or understanding of what the prison system was like. Who were the people? You sort of unravel your understanding of what prison is. I grew up obviously with the rhetoric that many of us grow up with, that if you're in prison, you're a bad person. And that's just not true. Like, you get there and you realize so much of who is in prison is a circumstantial situation, a mistake, a human mistake, a systemic mistake. And so anyways, my long story long, I became a different person with that understanding of the world and has deeply informed how I move through and do my work and speak with people now. So thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. I love hearing that impact of that. You know, we hope that the experience is transformative for everybody involved, and it almost always is. So it's great to hear that has had such an impact on your life.
what Defy does really well is it just shows us that we're all human, that we're all just humans having this experience. Can you tell us a little bit about the curriculum and the program that you guys have created?
Yeah, sure. And I think you are exactly right in that what we, particularly with the volunteer events that we do, the first and foremost, what we seek to do is restore humanity. And everybody in the space, whether you're incarcerated or non-incarcerated, have this opportunity to be humans together. I think for people who have never volunteered with us or never been inside a prison, that can sound like either obvious or cliche or something like that, but it is something that we take for granted, something that I took for granted before I started doing this work, that I'm a human every day. What are you talking about, right? I think that's often one of the biggest aha moments when people walk in. They're like, oh, I get it, right? These are people who are stripped of their humanity in a carceral setting from the moment they got here and every single day until they go home. And it's hard to process. And I hear from volunteers who come, they're still processing this days and weeks afterwards, as perhaps you did. So the program, the way it works is that it's a roughly 6-month to 9-month program. We have our own curriculum we built over the 15 years we've run the program. It's grown to about 2,000 pages in its 4th edition now. It's led by a live instructor. The entrepreneurs in training, which is what we call the people who are in our class, or EITs for short, they come to class once or twice a week. It's about 5 to 6 hours of class time per week, and then another 10 hours of work they're doing on their own. And it's covering, it is entrepreneurship themed for sure, but really entrepreneurship is a canvas for transformation. And they certainly will learn entrepreneurial skill sets along the way. And we want that. And we do culminate in a pitch competition at the end. But really, what we're fundamentally trying to do is say, hey, when you walk into this room, maybe you are an inmate and a number or a felon or whatever the sum of your past mistakes, was, right? But when you're in here, you are an entrepreneur in training. And as an entrepreneur, we want you to think about something bigger in your life than your past. And what are your unique gifts and talents? And how are you going to become the person you really want to be? And so it's equal parts personal development, career readiness, well-being, reentry preparation, and entrepreneurship, all kind of mixed together in a very, very intentional way.
That's what I love about it, is that it's not just saying, okay, here's a tool in your kit to get out and figure out how you're going to make a living if you can't get hired. It's really focusing on the internal parts of yourself that are going to keep you making the right decisions for yourself, that are going to work through your limiting beliefs, your self-sabotage, to help
Absolutely.
you become the fullest version of yourselves. And that's what has always struck me about the program, or what's made me feel very nurtured by the experience, is that these are very spiritual people. And I think depending on the choices you make when you are incarcerated, I do think there's a piece of incarceration that leads to a spiritual life if you choose it, making the most of the time that you have to better yourself. And so the people in this program are very self-selecting. That's obviously not indicative of the entire prison. I only have interfaced with your students. And I find I have very deep, enriching, meaningful conversations every time I go, and every time I learn something new or expands me in some way, because we're coming from very radically different life experiences. And so there's a lot to learn. It's not just, obviously we're talking about the businesses they're starting, but behind those businesses are often stories of passion or stories of unexplored hobbies, or maybe things they started to explore while incarcerated. I think my favorite was last graduation, was the guy who crocheted all these stuffed animals. I was like, they would be selling for $200 at a Brentwood children's store. They were very amazing. And he made them for his own children, was selling them in the prison. And hopefully when he gets out, he'll bring that dream to fruition. But there's a lot of creativity and a lot of untapped genius that we are sitting on and sacrificing in the carceral system.
We'll have folks from VCs kind of join us for some of our events, and we love having them. And oftentimes what I'll hear from them is 90% of the pitches I heard today, or actually all of the pitches I heard today, are better than 90% of the pitches I hear in my day-to-day, because these businesses actually can make money. Right. There is a lot of creativity. Constraints inspire creativity, and the constraints of prison inspire a lot of creativity, some of it to the negative, we try to bring out the creativity to the positive. It's true, people are immensely talented behind the walls there. We're taught to believe that prison is full of bad people, but what somebody once said to me is prison isn't full of bad people, it's full of people who made bad decisions. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of good people in there who made bad decisions. That's where this idea of how do we give them a fair chance or a second chance. I prefer fair chance because a lot of them never had a real first chance along the way. When we bring all these volunteers in, we are really trying to address that perception of these are, animals who will never amount to anything, right? It's like, that's not true. These are thinking humans who have, in many cases, tons of emotional intelligence, lots of creativity, lots of smarts and talent. And we're talking about how we give them a different door to walk through.
It demystifies or debunks a lot of our perceived understandings of, we're all told a story about prison when we're kids. And for me, so much of what I've learned is a lot of it is just wrong place, wrong time, circumstantial choices. And of course, there's people that have done, bad things, sure. But what I love about Defy, and we say this every time, is that you are not the worst thing you've ever done.
Let's just, for the purposes of sort of thought exercise, let's just assume that everybody in there made a bad decision. And almost everybody in there made a really bad decision at some point in their past, and a decision that they likely really regret. And talking about the idea of fair chances that a lot of people didn't. You grow up in an area where your grandfather was in the gang, your father was in the gang, your mom was in the gang. And so, of course, you're in the gang too, right? And that leads you down this path that is very, very hard to get out of. When we start to put ourselves in those circumstances and we think about the decisions that were made, I think really important for people to understand is that there are a lot of bigger forces in our life. Sure, there are bad decisions made, but there are other forces that have come to bear that took people down those roads to those decisions. We do an exercise called Step to the Line, which I know you know about, but that it's an empathy building exercise. And really the idea is for us to see the commonalities as much as we see differences, and to sort of recognize that as humans, right, our experiences and our zip codes, right, matter a lot in terms of the decisions we ended up making. And so when you start to give people different options, particularly as they get older and have more perspective, you can expect different results from people because people do change. And so many of the folks we work with went into prison when they were under the age of 23 or under the age of 18 even. And now they're 40. And this idea that like we shouldn't be expecting them to have changed over time, particularly if we're giving them some opportunities to be different, it's ridiculous. I think people start to see that when they're in there and they talk to people like, oh, I'm not afraid of this person. I would even give this person a job when they come home, even though they may have done something really pretty awful when they were 17, but it was 25 years ago. People learn, they grow.
We have to believe that we all evolve and can grow. And so much of that comes to exposure, what you surround yourself with. And Defy really does a great job of showing people their internal magic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What drew you to this work in the first place?
In one of my past lives, in my bio, you kind of got towards just to the end, there was a little thing about working in construction. I had a brief diversion in the world of construction. I actually ran a job site for 2 years as a general contractor. When I was running a job site, I met these people from all these different walks of life. I really enjoyed that aspect of that work. Is just, I had a concrete crew from Oaxaca, and I had a framing crew from Guatemala, and another crew from somewhere else, and the electricians were Vietnamese, and so all the people from different walks of life. And I also met people there for the first time that I was aware of who were formerly incarcerated. And that was the first time I had met anybody who was formerly incarcerated that I was aware of. One of the guys on that site was a day laborer who kind of was recruited by one of the other guys, and he came walking up and he was working day to day, and I got to talking. He was probably 19 and had been kind of in jail and kind of a junior gangbanger and was on probation. And I really tried to make it my mission to mentor this kid. So I'd be like, how do I set you on a new path? And this was 2007. There wasn't a lot going on at that point for people coming home from prison. And And, it's like, well, there's Homeboy or there's this construction thing. Maybe we can help you with this union thing. He seemed so excited about that. And one day he showed up and he had bought himself some tools. He had this broom and his own shovel. And he's like, look what I got. And I was like, oh yeah, that's great. He seemed really proud. And then at some point he just kind of disappeared. And then I found out he was picked up on a probation violation. And I felt really badly about it. Right? I felt like, what else is there out there? Or, what it could have helped this person go down a different path, because it felt like there was just almost nothing. So that stayed with me. And when I was working in my time at City Year and working in education and doing dropout prevention work, you really see the school to prison pipeline, and kids who drop out of high school are far more likely to end up in prison. And you start to see the path dependence that happens of people who grow up in areas that are very violent with high rates of poverty and substance use. You start to see okay, that is, prison ends up as the intervention.
Right.
So when Defy came along to me after doing all those different things, to me it was just this really amazing opportunity to bring all those things together from my past life and start working on this issue and applying myself to this final intervention, supporting people in changing their path and opening those doors up for transformation. Something that's important to say is none of us here at Defy are saving anybody. We are not saviors. That's not what we do, right? What we do is offer a doorway to walk through that people can take, and they can use that to construct their own transformation and affect their transformation. Yeah, provide that resource, provide that door so that people have a choice, because we're all about choices at Defy, right? Nobody's made to do the program. If you choose to do the program, there are expectations. If you choose to meet the expectations, then you're going to be positively impacted by it. If you don't choose to do it, hey, that's fine. You can't stay in the class, but you could do it again later. But it's all about how do we give people agency and to give them the choice. Because I think what can be so tragic is when somebody's like, hey, I'm ready to be different, and they're in prison, there may not be that choice for them to be different because the program isn't there for them to be different, or something else is going on that won't allow them to be different. But so we are all about offering people that choice. And what we see is when we give you the choice, when we give people the choice and they make that choice, boy, can they do really well.
Oh, unbelievable shifts from beginning to end of the course. But what I appreciate is that you do have expectations and there's consequences if you don't meet those expectations. And many people think they're ready to do X amount of work, and it happens out here too. And then they realize they get into it, they're not quite ready. And there's a few people that I've met in the program that started it, didn't make it through the first time, came back later, and then they were ready. And when you get out, one of the big things is you go from having this, I was actually thinking about this the other day, which is that you go from having a life where most things are designed for you. You're not making a lot of choices. This is when you eat. This is when you do this. And then you get out into a world in which now there's 8,000 decisions every day to be made. There's technology you're not familiar with, and it can feel really overwhelming. So creating that sense of personal agency while incarcerated is really important to set people up to succeed when they leave.
Yeah, 100%. People come home. Our program continues. We didn't get into this, but just to finish that story, once folks finish the program and they release, we then have continued programming when they come home. And our first module is called our Career and Reentry program. And that's a case manager who's helping people understand what the resources are that are available to them, help give them a Chromebook, help them get a job, and really navigate reentry, because it really requires navigation. It is really overwhelming to come home and have all those choices. And we do work to try to place them in jobs or connect them into job opportunities. But I think one of the biggest differentiators for people who come home having completed Defy versus folks who come home without doing Defy is a mindset. And if they come home and they finish our program, they come home with a different amount of resilience and perseverance and optimism and confidence that really changes their ability to reenter successfully. And we hear this from people all the time. They're like, I put the things that Defy taught me to work, and that's how I got this job, because I walked in and I sat down and I told them the best version of myself, but I took accountability and I believed in myself and was able to put myself out there, and with a different narrative a personal narrative that I developed through my time at Defy, and then I got the job. And you contrast that to people who don't do that work inside. And if your narrative when you come home from prison is, look, I'm a bad person. I went to prison. I hate myself. I'm angry. Can I have a job? Right? That doesn't go well. And so many people come home with that version of themselves, not having worked through it. And that's one of the reasons why you see these recidivism rates so high, is that no one told them that it could be something different. And at Defy, we tell them that, but we also bring in volunteers like you to tell them that. And the amazing thing is, they believe it. And once they believe it, right?
But once you feel things, you can manifest.
You can be different. Absolutely. There is the affirmation and the personal narrative, like that's real, very real stuff there.
So out of the 9 states you operate in, are there differences in sort of, I've seen California, the prison system in California change a lot, especially post-pandemic. It's become a lot more rehabilitative. It feels very different than it did pre-pandemic. And I was just wondering, are different states different? Are you pioneering in some states? Tell us a little bit more about that process.
Huge range. California is a leader, frankly, in their approach to rehabilitation in a lot of ways. I mean, they got a long way to go, but in my time doing this work over the last 8 years, it feels much different doing the work that we do and that we get from corrections here than it did when we started. New York is probably one of the hardest places to work.
Interesting.
Just super unfriendly to programs there. It's hard to get the permission to do the stuff we want to do. They just had this correction officers wildcat strike where the officers went on an illegal strike there, and they had to call in the National Guard to staff the prisons. The National Guardsmen don't really know how to run a prison, of course. The incarcerated people are locked in their cells for almost the entire day. They weren't getting the access they needed, and all the programs got shut down. And it still hasn't come back online. But even when we are able to get in, it's just culturally, it's very hard to work there. And there's everything in between. We worked in a state where we were in a women's prison, and the women, they become emotional, as you've seen in a women's prison, which is okay.
Very different experience, for the record.
Super different.
Prison.
Yeah, super different. But the superintendent in that location had a freak out and was like, they're crying, they're going to kill themselves. What, you can't do this here. And they shut us down eventually and were like, you can't run Step to the Line in the women's prison. It's not safe. When you ask the women in our program, their favorite part of the whole program, it was that exercise because, in quotes, I felt human. Right? But from the leader of that facility standpoint, it's like, oh, emotional dysregulation equals danger. Right. Suicide, which...
Instead of saying, it's release, it's positive.
Right. We're giving people a chance there. And we know what we're doing, by the way, right?
Yeah,
we've been doing this for years.
And the stress cycle, it creates a lot of beautiful things in the body and the brain.
Look, you have to be careful with this, of course. But we have a doctorate of social work, himself formerly incarcerated, who's part of our team that helps us develop these things. We've had correction psychologists look at our stuff. It is designed to elicit a human response and then to come out of that and to be inspired by it. And so that was super disheartening to have a prison where, any kind of amount of humanity was like,
you're fighting.
Not allowed. So we're not working there anymore, which is a bummer. But
in my experience alone, because I've come to you various times with questions or things that I'm wondering, or what is the protocol on this or what makes sense. Yeah. And I feel as an organization, you are very open to feedback. You're open to challenging things you've done or doing them differently. And that's the sort of necessary component to continue to evolve, moving with the times and seeing, do we need to maybe look at this exercise and does it make sense anymore? I feel like you guys are very good at doing that because we've had conversations like that.
We're always looking to be better and to iterate. And we learn a lot over time. As I said, we're on our 4th edition of our textbook. One of the things we learned over time was working with women. Women within the carceral system is super interesting aspect in that women are a marginalized population even within prisons because they only make up 10 to 15% of the incarcerated population in America. Women are treated in the same way that men are treated in the carceral system. Like the systems are designed for men. The security system, the discipline system, the programming systems are designed for men. And so when you have women in the system, you lay those same protocols and systems and procedures to women, it can be super damaging because they react really differently to things than men. They process trauma differently. They interact with each other differently. And programs are no different. So our program was originally designed work with men before we started working with women. And after running with women a few times, we started to see like, oh, feels like it's not going that well. And so we spent several years doing work to make it more gender responsive. And what we learned in doing that was that even though the content by the end is the same, we have to reorder pieces of it because the trust building happens in a really different way. The processing happens in a really different way. And so we had to scaffold it differently to serve the needs of people in women's facilities. And these are all parts of ways that we learn along the way as we do stuff. We get feedback, we iterate, we try it again.
That's really interesting. I didn't actually know that. That's really cool. That's how the sausage is made, I guess. I just come and I experience it, but I didn't think about all the sort of A/B testing that goes in the back end to make this the right environment and experience for both sides.
It's complicated stuff. There's lots of people in the world.
You have to be incredibly thoughtful in spaces like these. And it's not simple. I just know that I think we had a conversation at one point where you said there's always two truths in prison, Denise. And I have never forgotten that. I think about it all the time. I dream about being a little fly on the wall in prison. It's like a subculture. It's a society of itself. There's a lot happening that I don't understand or I don't see. And I just find subcultures very fascinating. And so I get tidbits in the time that I spend. But when you had said there's two truths in prison, I was like, oh, okay. It's always more complicated than it seems. And you understand that much more deeply than I do.
Through the looking glass effect, right, of prison, it's really hard to describe, but I think a lot of volunteers will walk out after the first time why is it like this, and why that, and why this, and why that? You can't apply the rules of civil society, which is where we live in, for the most part. When you get into prison, it's just everything is upside down. It's just what's black is white, what's white is black. It's a completely different truth in there, and if you try to apply the rules that we live by, nothing makes any sense at all. It is a subculture. It's very different. It is endlessly fascinating and tragic. I mean, the economics of prison and sort of the tribalism that happens. And one of the things I find most fascinating about my job is the economics of what happens inside prison and how that drives behaviors. And there are economies, there is taxation between the contraband that flows, there is decisions that are made around business. It's a whole society, a kind of society that exists in there that is responsive to the environment. And correctional officers live in that society too in a lot of ways. And something else that I think has been sort of part of my continued growth in this world is when I started this job, I really felt like correctional officers were they're the enemy here. We just have to kind of work around them and we can't get our work done because these correctional officers are bad. And what I have learned over time is correctional officers are victimized by our carceral system in many ways too. And there's a reason why they have incredibly high suicide rates and rates of alcoholism and shorter life expectancies than lots of other jobs, because they're in a really bad environment too. And I'm not excusing what happens, because the way correctional officers often, certainly not always, but how that may manifest is in abuse of the incarcerated people. But I also have empathy for the fact it's a really difficult job and a really difficult environment, and they don't get the support they need to change how they view their role in this thing. If they happen to be somebody's I'm here to make a difference, right? And they can stick with that, wow, that's something, because they're in this incredibly dark place doing that. And so that's something that I continue to think about in our role and something I hope to do in the future with Defy is how do we also support correctional officers so that they have the ability to kind of grow and find fulfillment in their work and be seen in the difficulty of their job. Much the same way that we work to make sure the incarcerated people are seen in their lives and what they're going through and what they're trying to do. And because I think if we really ultimately, yes, we want to change recidivism rates, but part of that is changing culture in prison so that they are places of rehabilitation. And we can't just do that by programming for incarcerated people. We also have to be supporting staff in these places to also be able to see things differently and be seen as people. That's kind of been something I've come to in the last couple of years. Is I think it's a piece that doesn't get talked about a lot, but
from what I've learned, just even with therapy or what you do with Defy, is that when people change, they change their corner of the world. They change how they interact with other people. And so I think there probably should be a program for the staff and giving them better tools. But at the same time, when the person that's incarcerated, the entrepreneur in training, shows up differently, they respond differently. That's the gift.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And we hear that from correctional officers. Like, I always know the Defy guys because they're the ones who I really like working with, and they're on the path, and they're like really like making good choices. And I love hearing that. And I also hear from correctional officers who are like, why can't we get this programming? Which at first I was like, well, you could get programming yourself. Go get it. But then I was like, well, why can't they get this programming? How amazing would it be if in a pitch competition, right, you had our entrepreneurs in training giving feedback to correctional officers on their business pitches, right? And vice versa, right? What a human experience you could have there. What a different way for them to interact that allows them to see each other as people and not as the guard and the guarded. And I find it fun to think about, like, what could that be like, right? What could it be like if we had prisons that were much more human for everybody who's there, whether it's correctional officers or incarcerated people? But how much better would the outcomes be in that case if we could do that? Look, lot of energy, long time off.
It would be an interesting case study and interesting data to pull from seeing how, if you modify these environments slightly or a lot, how does the recidivism rate change?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you think is the biggest misconception about prison?
Firstly, where we started, which is that prison is full of bad people, right? Prison is full of many good people who did bad things.
Yes.
And so I think that is the number one misperception out there, is that it's just filled with these like violent animals who are incorrigible, can never be let out back on the street. Number one. Number two is that people are going away and they're never coming home. Absolutely wrong, right? 95% of the people who are in prison are going to come home at some point, no matter what they did. 95%. When people think like, oh, people are going away, they're not coming home, it actually allows them to have this sort of false sense of like, oh, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. Why bother giving them programming? They're never coming home, right? But when you start to think about it, it's like, no. Almost everyone's going to come home. Who do you want to be your neighbor? Do you want the person who had access to programs, had the ability to rethink who they were and what their purpose was and what they wanted to do? Or do you want the person who sat there and just got angrier and angrier and comes out feeling like, nothing but shame, and then they live that shame and then they go back? That is another big misperception that's out there. And those are ones that we really try hard to address. Also that, like, I think people inside are like, somehow like they're dumb or like they're not talented, or I think that is also a perception we challenge very easily, because as soon as you sit across from somebody, like hear them pitch their idea, like, oh wow, okay, yeah, this is.
I remember like there was a guy in one of the classes when I volunteered who had robbed, I think, 26 banks, 27th got caught.
Yeah.
And I was like, you're a genius.
Yeah.
One bank alone, the paranoia alone, I would be in deep doo-doo.
Yeah.
I'm like, the fact that you pulled that off with that many banks, that is a skill set applied to another discipline. You're a genius. You have a lot to give us. It was just applied to something illegal versus applied to something legal. And I think the framework people need to understand is that there's a lot of really amazing talent. How they chose to express that talent may not be the right medium, but that doesn't mean that there's not a immense amount of intelligence and gifts to be supported.
Yeah, you make a great point. I think that's part of what we say at Defy, is we want to help people transform their hustle. But, so many people inside were business owners or operators before they got there. They just happened to be illegal businesses. Somebody who's running a $10 million drug empire across 20 corners, they got some skills to do that, totally. Right? And so what we were to do is to give them a different framework, a different language, and different purpose in how they take those skills and apply them. And
it's translatable.
Super translatable.
I created my own concentration in college, and that's a lot of what they taught us was interdisciplinary seminars in which you could figure out how to translate skill sets. And it's the best way of learning because then you never feel limited. I've changed industries 4 times. I've always been like, there's a different, just apply this skill set over here. It's the same thing. And then you become really resilient because as one industry shrinks or implodes, you're able to then pivot to something else. And that's the beauty of what you help these guys do is understand what they already know how to do and then just expand it so they can then move into a different industry or space.
I think that's right. You give them a different option, different opportunity, different place to go.
When I talk about Defy, people are always really excited and impressed, and then it's a different thing getting them to show up and sign up, which I've had quite a bit of success, but there's still some people that just we have to figure out the timing. But what do you tell people that are resistant or hesitant to volunteer? I know what I tell them, and I'll tell you afterwards.
What I will tell them is this will be life-changing for you. And I'm like, I'm not overselling it. It'll be life-changing for you to come and do this. And I also try to tell them, like, listen, it's totally normal to feel nervous about it. We're taught from a very early age, don't go to prison. Which makes sense, by the way, but that you'll somehow be in danger as a volunteer there. So I try to tell them, like, listen, you're not going to be in any danger. We've had 7,000 people come inside with us as volunteers, and never lost a volunteer yet. But also that you're going to have an opportunity to support someone's transformation, and also you're going to transform yourself, and it will be really different experience for you that you will always remember and you'll always value.
Okay, so similar to what I say. I say that it's some of the best days of my year. As long as I'm in town, I go every 3 months. That's sort of what I've been doing. So I was just there in January, at the end of January, and we had 22 volunteers, 4 people of whom lost their homes in the fires.
Oh, yeah.
It was hard. They still showed up, really profound. And then the guys had made these beautiful books of like poetry and drawings to give them a little keepsake for them during a tough time. Yeah, and that is a great microcosm of what this experience is like. Oftentimes in volunteering, it doesn't feel connective always. Okay, I'm like serving food or I'm dropping off donations. But what I love about Defy is it feels reciprocal. It feels like I'm getting something, you're getting something. It feels equal and even. And sometimes in volunteering, I'm like, okay, I spent all this time, but I don't know, do I feel good? Did I give enough? Did I receive enough? Because I think any healthy giving, there's receiving involved. That's what I love about this program. I walk away, I learn something new every time. I have a different experience every time with Step to the Line. I learn new things about myself, and then I learn new things about other people. And different people, as with anything, connections touch you in different ways. But still feels like one of the best things I could do with my time, period.
Yeah, I'm so glad you feel that way. And I think we're going to be together in May.
Yes, I'm planning on it. And hopefully I'm trying to do both graduations, A yard and B yard. We'll see.
We'll see, yes. I think we've talked about Step to the Line a little bit. Maybe it'd be helpful to tell your listeners what Step to the Line is. One of the exercises we do during the event is an empathy building exercise called Step to the Line, where it's a silent sharing exercise. Hard to describe fully, but we share a series of statements and you move back and forth to a line if it's true for you or not. And
I sometimes don't
it's this
like
opportunity.
Share too much because I want people to have their own discovery with it. So I try and keep it simple. We share statements that are true for you.
Yeah, we share you move back and forth, and it's designed to let people learn about each other.
And one of the pleasures of Defy is that phones are not allowed in prison.
Yes, indeed.
You are phoneless for 8 hours, and you are just deeply present in a way in modern culture and society. We don't get that level of presence in the same way we used to. So that is also something I really love, is that I don't have my phone all day, and my only job is just to be really, really present.
I think that is one of the reasons why the experience is so impactful, is because when else in your life will you be locked in a room without your phone?
It's amazing.
It doesn't happen, and it's my least favorite part of the experience is when I leave the prison and have to check my phone.
Oh, it's horrifying. Horrifying. You're like, I don't want to know.
So, but when you're in there, I think people are shocked by this experience of living without their phone for 8 hours, and I think that's part of what makes it so impactful. Is like you are hyper present in this environment, which is very uncomfortable when you get in there, but weirdly comfortable by the time you leave.
I'll start usually at the beginning of a course. I'll come back for graduation, so I get to see how these guys progress and be a part of their journey. And also what's really cool is many of them come back and be TAs for the next group.
Yes.
So then I built rapport with quite a few guys that a lot of them have now left prison, but it's nice to see that pipeline. So we've talked about misconceptions. What is one thing that you think you wish everyone knew about the prison?
I wish people understood that prison is a really horrible place to be, and that very few people would choose to be in prison. And they're just some of the darkest places in America. The way that we treat people and dehumanize people. I wish people understood that. And that I also wish, as a corollary to that, that people understood that the cost of incarceration to somebody who has done something that warranted incarceration is loss of freedom, not loss of humanity. Mm-hmm. And because when you start to think of prison in that way, look, you can make a case for why this person needs to have a long time out from society, right? That removal, right, is something. But the idea of retribution, I think it's feels good to people from an emotional place. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, I want retribution. This person did this harm. It was bad, and so we need retribution. But I wish people understood that retribution doesn't get us anywhere in the long run. Doesn't make us safer. It doesn't make us healthier. It certainly doesn't make us wealthier. And prisons as places of retribution is an idea whose time is long, long past. And I wish people would really think about prison as a purpose of rehabilitation. Sure, some deterrence, sure, removal, but primarily rehabilitation versus retribution.
Prison has given me an immense amount of empathy and compassion in my day-to-day life. And that's just what I want to say, is that it has changed a lot of how I think about things and how I show up in the world. And it is a terrible place. And I hope we can move to a place where it's more of a rehabilitative place, but it is a great teacher for all of us. And so I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that you do and for doing it for all of us, them and us. I encourage anyone listening to join the program because it is a fundamentally positive, powerful movement that I wish more people would engage with.
Thank you for being part of the journey with me. It's always wonderful to have you with us as part of our work and part of our community.
Well, it's not stopping anytime soon.
Glad to hear it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you do like listening, it would mean the world to us if you could subscribe or review the podcast anywhere that you watch or listen to the podcast. It really helps with the algorithm to share this with the world. I want to give a special thank you to young Spielberg and Sarah Yarkin for their beautiful work on our opening jingle, Dana Boulos for her help with the beautiful art, and to all of you for tuning in and keeping this dream alive. If you want to hear certain topics or from certain guests, please feel free to email us. We really, really want to hear from you and see how we can best support you. See you next time.